Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach GP channel, and in today's episode I have another post FP2 final thoughts F1 fantasy video ready for your screens. And well, what happens in these sorts of videos, you might be asking? Well, basically we go through everything from FP1 and FP2 to basically give you the most up-to-date info you can have to decide which teams you are going to be running in F1 fantasy. So straight away, if you like what you see, make sure to like and subscribe, and on my left side of the screen you will also see the budget needed for every single driver and constructor to go up in value. A tier drivers can go maximum up 0.3 and B tier drivers can go maximum up 0.6. But for all of your teams, this will never change, so this information is very crucial throughout the entire video. Now straight away, let's head into some hard and fast info about which drivers and constructors you should be looking at for your teams. Now remember, in this tier list, if I do not mention their names, that means you do not bring them into your team. Now straight up into the A tier drivers, and one name as per usual stands out above them all, and his name is Oscar Piastri. Again, even when he wasn't winning, he was beating Lando Norris on fantasy points. When he did win in Spa, he didn't even have fastest lap or driver of the day, he still got the most points out of the bunch. So Oscar Piastri for me is consistently the best, has the least amount of points to go up in budget from the A tier drivers, so it's a no-brainer to have Oscar Piastri in your team. Now A tier wise also, you can use Lando Norris this weekend now that he only needs 36 points to go up 0.3 million. But for me, with how close it is between Norris and Piastri, and especially with us really trying to push that last little budget building to go up to those mega teams, I just don't think it's worth looking at Lando Norris this weekend for now. However, if he does blow away the competition, let's say in FP3, maybe I'll consider it. But right now, 100% you can use him as a differential, but it's a differential I probably won't be using myself. Then the last two you could use A tier driver-wise is George Russell and Lewis Hamilton. Now, these two names are the names that you would be using if you are going to use the two A tier driver builds, which would be Piastri Hamilton or Piastri Russell. However, bear this both in mind, because 100% I would never two times one of these drivers, so only if you have the budget to use them alongside Piastri as the two times driver, then I would use them. Then heading into the A tier constructors, and as usual, it has to be McLaren as the top constructor everyone has in their team, alongside Ferrari. Nothing much has changed coming from Spa to Hungary, as it looks from FP1 and FP2. McLaren and Ferrari both look strong. However, with that being said, Red Bull and Mercedes, for the first time in quite a few race weekends, are usable. So if you do want to go for a differential, it's not an absolute terrible play to go for someone like Red Bull with the magic Verstappen can bring, and again Mercedes if they pull something out of the bag. However, for me, 100% McLaren and Ferrari look like the strongest two. It's only if you want to go against the grain and go for a differential, you would pick one of those. Then B tier wise, again like last weekend, we actually have two standout drivers that need to be in most teams if possible, and that is Nico Hülkenberg, being in brilliant form F1 fantasy points wise especially, and Lance Stroll. Both of these drivers mainly need negative points to even go up at least 0.1, and even with Lance Stroll he only needs 2 points to go up 0.6 million, and compared to what every other B tier driver is like going into this weekend, you can't look away from this. So 100% for me, Nico Hülkenberg has to be in every single person's team, and same goes for Lance Stroll. Not as much. If you can't afford him, it's not the end of the world, but again, he's still a very much vital asset to hold this weekend. Then going into the rest of the B tier drivers you should be looking at, it's the likes of Alex Albon and Ollie Behrman, again looking great for points and don't need that much budget to go up. And again, at the price floor, you have Franco Colapinto and Liam Lawson. So both of those two assets, no matter how bad they do, cannot lose you budget in the game, which means they are brilliant assets to hold just in case you need that extra money from someone else to go up to a Stroll, up to a Hülkenberg to have in that team as well. And to use at your own risk, Fernando Alonso, he's another great asset that can be used this weekend. Even though he was in FP2 and actually was phenomenal getting P5, I just think, and I'll talk about this when Aston Martin comes up as well, if someone like Aston Martin did actually have that pace, they'd probably drop down, or it's one of those things where it's a trap and they're not actually that fast. I just don't think they could have done that much of a turnaround from Spa to Hungary. However, it is enough pace for me to potentially keep an eye on Alonso, because it is a riskier asset now that we know all of these issues with his back. However, it could be a very valuable one if he becomes a differential. So keep an eye on Alonso. He does look good, but he looks risky. Then finally heading into B-tier constructors, and like I mentioned most weekends, when I mention these constructors you should be using, bear this in mind that I don't think you should be using any B-tier constructors at this point of the season unless you have really low budgets. But with that being said, if you do have low budget or you want to go against the grain, the best ones are still definitely Sauber, Haas or Williams. Again, they need so little points to go off, and Williams finally are usable as well, and with Williams' pace of recent, they look like a pretty not too shabby choice there. However, Aston Martin, one of the best coming into this weekend. It's the same thing I was sort of saying with Alonso. I just think with the Alonso risk, you have to keep an eye on that situation over there. But also, I don't think they've shown enough pace for me to go instantly, okay, they've had this in FP2, I'm going to use Aston Martin this weekend. Remember Austria, that did the same thing here and they didn't have the pace in quali or the race. So I know a lot of people will be going, oh, should I be going Aston Martin with McLaren? For me, it looks like a trap and I would not go for it. I would say definitely it looks good enough to be keeping Alonso and keeping Stroll in there. However, the actual team as a constructor, I don't think so. Now heading into chips this weekend, and it's actually quite easy because if you still have Limitless, this is the only big chip I would recommend using. Hungary, low overtakes, so there's going to be probably a big threshold between the big 5 A-tier drivers, so you'll get a good deficit to everyone having to run the B-tier drivers. However, with the rest of the chips, I guess final fix, again, only if we have a big driver like Verstappen, Norris, Piastri going out in Q1, then I'd recommend going to final fix. However, no negative, it doesn't look like there's going to be rain at race time on Sunday. Be surprised if anyone wanted to use that. Again, extra DRS, not this weekend, you want to be using it on a sprint. Same with autopilot, same with all of the other chips. Wildcard I wouldn't recommend as well. But now heading into the best part of the video, the team selections. Now straight away I'm going to go with the most basic team selection that everyone should be looking at, and that is the old reliable. Now I say the most basic one that everyone can go for. Hold your horses, I'm going to show the most expensive version of this team that works and then go all the way down that ladder to teams that you should be bringing in. So first up, the first team I look at is Piastri, Stroll, Behrman, Albon, Hulkenberg, McLaren, Ferrari for 126.8. Now, why do I mention hold your horses? Well, first of all, if you have 126.8, I don't recommend going for these sorts of teams. You'd probably want to go for the 2 A-tier driver, 2 A-tier constructor teams in the first place. But also, with the old reliable, it's more of the team before the meta. So realistically, even though this is the best of the old reliable, I wouldn't recommend anyone to use this. However, it's a good point to move on because basically all you have to do to make this team affordable for yourself is follow this. Albon down to Alonso for 123.1. Then if you still don't have this money, then you go out Alonso to Lawson for 120.7. Then sadly, if you can't afford this, I'd recommend actually switching to Ferrari to Mercedes for 116.1. As realistically, if you have less budget than this now, you still want to be trying to get that budget up so you can run Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari teams. Then you would go Behrman to Alonso for 114.9. Then Alonso to Colapinto for 112.5. And then Stroll to Behrman for 111.5 and Behrman to Alonso for 110.3. And realistically, that is where I would stop dropping down these teams. If you don't have over 110 million, I would recommend using the budget building teams that I'm about to mention right now. Then I would drop down to the Piastri, McLaren, Aston teams, which have Hulkenberg, Stroll, Behrman, all of these good budget building potential drivers who are also good on points. So I very much recommend it to anyone around that level. And hey, if you're still just starting out on F1 Fantasy and you only have 100 million, the only step down I'd have to do would be Albon to Lawson for 100.6. Now, for everyone out there with big budget to their name, after FP2, I would very much recommend going for the Ferrari versions. Now, I'll start off with the bulkier ones. I don't think many people will be able to use them, but again, I'll drop down as per usual, where you have Piastri, Hamilton, McLaren, Ferrari, and this would also go with Bortoleto, Lawson, Colapinto. Again though, the reason why I'm a little bit iffy about these teams right now is because if you just hold off one more week, we're going to be seeing Bortoleto, Lawson, Colapinto all usable at the price floor coming into Zandvoort, when these teams could then potentially build you budgets and not get you stuck in that position. Because if you go to this team this weekend, a lot of people are going to build budget and realistically not get that many points less than you. The race weekend afterwards, then you could get the points plus the budget. So it makes sense. Only really if you're desperate to move over to this team would you go to it. But for now, I'd recommend not. However, there is a way you can move around this. If you drop Hamilton to Russell for 126, then go from Bortoleto to Behrman for 129.4 or Behrman to Hulkenberg for 130.4, then I would say you're able to do these teams 1 week earlier than a lot of other people as well. But only in those big situations where you have that much value to be throwing around. Logically, if you were to use the 2 A-tier driver, 2 A-tier constructor builds this weekend, it probably would have to be with Mercedes as that second constructor because they are just so much cheaper. And the reason I mention this is because it's that much cheaper that it only cost you 125.8 million to run Piastri, Russell, Hulkenberg, Colapinto, Lawson with McLaren and Mercedes. Now again, with where Mercedes looked after FP2, I just would not recommend it because yes, it would keep helping you build that budget, but Ferrari looked like they could have another weekend where they're scoring 30 to 20 points more than Mercedes, and at that point you're blocking off all those points that Russell would get for you, and you're losing out on budget from another B-tier driver potentially, so it just ends up being not worth it. So a lot to think about coming into this weekend. Do you want to play it safe with the Piastri, McLaren, Ferrari teams? Do you want to try that meta potentially with the Mercedes option, still budget building, or go all out and don't care about budget anymore for the Piastri, Hamilton, McLaren, Ferrari teams? Comment down below, but I will be helping everyone out in the comments until the deadline, so please put any issues you have with your teams down there and I will help you out. As per usual, I will be live streaming on the Fan App channel an hour before qualifying as well to go through our final thoughts before that deadline occurs. Make sure to join up to the McLaren League before the deadline as well, because this is the final weekend that you can join it, because there are quite a few fun prizes there. And of course, join the Fan Amp League as well over on the featured leagues on F1 Fantasy. We've got over 60k people on it right now, so absolute scenes. Thank you all so much for joining it. But anyway, this is it for me today. Like and subscribe if this helps you out with your F1 Fantasy teams. Enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you all very soon.